We've just arrived for part 2 of the day fishing series that I'm doing. Today's episode is going to be based around fishing in snags. So fishing up to snags, pads, reeds, etc. And most importantly though, it's going to be about how to do that safely. Well, here we are back at the same venue, this time using a different method to try and catch carp. Today we are trying to catch carp by snag fishing. Now, snags are a really good place to find carp and a good place to catch them from. They offer security, like shelter from the elements, and I'm sure they can't feel safe when they're in snags. It gives them some sort of protection from predators. Not that there are predators so much now that they're going to take a carp, but they've got an inbuilt fear of predators from various places, but the sky being one of them. And being under the canopy of snags and in amongst branches gives them some sort of security against that. Snag can be a comfortable place for carp to lay up. There's not necessarily so much water movement because it's broken by the structures that are underwater. So it's a nice place for them to sit and chill out. There will be food in snags. You'll have snails and whatnot in there, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily a feeding area. So when fishing snags, we're fishing for carp that are not necessarily feeding. So it's our job, or my job as an angler, to try and encourage them to leave the sanctuary of the snag and come out to have a little feed. Now, when I'm talking about snags, I'm talking about mostly it's overhanging branches, fallen trees, bushes. What I'm saying, it would equally apply to fishing in pads or up against reed beds, and also some man-made structures, things like old swim platforms, things like that, or sunken boats. Everything is, although there might not be so much natural snags, the same sort of rules apply. And my main concern when I'm snag fishing is that of carp safety. When I look at a snag for the first time and thinking about fishing it, I'm assessing the possibilities of landing fish from there. Will I be able to get them out? Is there a realistic proposition of landing a fish from that spot, or is it going to be putting them in jeopardy? Now, there might be things I can do to stack the odds in my favour a little bit. Things like maybe only using 2 rods or 1 rod just to keep the swim clear, so that should I get a fish, there's plenty of room for me to move about and deal with it and get it out quickly. Things like not doing bivvy doors up. There's no place for that for snag fishing, or even sleeping bags. I wouldn't do the sleeping bag up if I'm fishing the snags. I want to be on those rods as quickly as possible. I want to be close to the rods, but I also want to leave a little bit of room behind them so that I can lift the rod up and walk backwards just to get the fish out straight away to stop it getting into the sanctuary. So there are little things that I can do to maximise the chances of landing the fish. It might be possible to fish from a different swim to get a better angle on the snag so that you can draw fish away from it rather than allowing them to kite into the snag. First thing, every time when I'm contemplating fishing a snag, is what are the chances of me getting them out? If I don't think there's a good chance, then I just won't fish there. And if I do think there is, I'll just look at all the things that I can possibly do to maximise the chances of getting them out. Before I put a rig anywhere near to a snag, I need to have some idea of the layout of what's going on underwater. Like some snags might just be, or not actually snags, they might just be an overhanging canopy. Or it might be that the club or syndicate have cut away a lot of the obstructions underneath, which is absolutely ideal. But a lot of the times you'll have sunken branches and all sorts of obstructions under the water. So it's important that I know where they are and where the danger is of a fish making sanctuary and getting in there. So I'll try and observe the snag either by a lot of them you can walk out on a branch. If it's a tree that's gone over, you can often have a little walk out on the branch. Sometimes you see the fish down there, but it's a great way to get an idea of where the branches are pointing and how far out they go. Let me know where it's safe to fish for the fish, particularly in clear water. I might be able to see, or I might be able to see from getting up a tree. Failing that, the way I'd go about it is to use just a bare lead, absolutely no rig because that's just going to get caught up, but a bare lead on the end of a line, and I want to use the smallest lead I possibly can, and it wants to be a streamlined shape so it doesn't get caught up so readily, and just have a few little exploratory casts, and just have just a general feel about to see if I can feel what's down there and see if there are any obstructions. And when it comes to actually placing my rig adjacent to the snag, I need to make sure that I put it in a position where the fish is least able to kite into the snag. Now, if I'm casting like directly to a snag that's opposite, then yeah, that might well be that anywhere along there is fine. But if it's one that's at an angle on a margin that's adjacent to my margin or on my margin, then I must fish at sort of like the closest point to me, which is likely to be the safest. If I go to the far side of the snag, then it's just a simple matter for a hooked fish just to kite straight in and make good its escape. So I may get fewer bites. It might not be the area of the obstruction that the fish favour, but it's far better off for me to fish the near side of the snag and get fewer bites but land what I hook than it is to hook lots of them and not land any of them. One really useful tool when you're fishing snags, particularly if they're on the near margin, is a baiting pole. That enables me to get underneath tight overhangs without the risk of casting into the bushes. So it can be used as a very safe way to fish snags. The temptation is there though, to put rigs under the snags, and under no circumstances is that acceptable. I'll use my baiting pole to get access to tight areas, but I use it to drop a rig where it's absolutely safe to do so. Say like a couple of foot short from the snag, rather than crashing a lead in with the risk of it going right underneath where it might not be so safe. Dead tree branches aren't going to produce any leaf litter or anything, but this is a live snag, so we've got live branches. It's a fallen willow. Come the winter time, those leaves are going to fall down. There's going to be detritus, bits of twigs and stuff on the lake bed. So I'm not fishing a bottom bait on this one. I'm fishing a very low pop up, and I don't really want a really tight concentration of bait like I would with if I'd spooned bait out. It's all going to fall in one clump. There's not much wind today. It's a pretty still lake, so there's not much water movement to spread bait about. And I'm fishing 𝗷𝗵𝗿𝗍s, so I don't really want those all in the clump together. So I've opted to put the rig out with the pole to get me underneath the branches safely and drop the rig safely off the canopy. But I'm baiting with 𝗷𝗵𝗿𝗍s, and I'm going to bait all along the front of the snag to try and get any fish that are underneath moving out and travelling along the snag. The one thing I would advise against is baiting right in the snag. Fish don't need any reason to be encouraged into the snag. They love sitting under there, they're safe. It's just a comfortable place for them to sit. And I see it as my job as an angler to encourage them to come out of the snag. And all I've got really to do that is my bait and bait application. So don't be the one that keeps baiting the back of the snags. All you're going to do is encourage the fish to spend more and more time in there. So by all means, like, bait the peripheries, bait just off the snags, and you know, the odd bait just going just slightly under the canopy is ideal, because that's going to give them something to sniff out, to come out and find your baited area. But as far as baiting right into the back of the snags goes, it's just something I wouldn't advise doing. It's not the sort of scenario where I think filling it in is an advantage. Quite the opposite, in fact. I think I want to be using small amounts of bait, because the very nature of snags is they're in the edge, or 90% of the time they're in the edge. So you're not going to have big groups of fish coming across. Often you might be fishing for just a handful of fish within a snag, and like smaller baited areas with just a handful of baits are much more likely to get me a bite. Oh, that one came out of the blue. I'm keeping my rod tip right down to make sure he can't get anywhere near any branches. Right, I've got him successfully away from the snag. I can slack my clutch off a little bit and resume fighting as normal, or playing the fish as normal. The first little glimpse of that, I thought that might be a mirror. I've still got to be careful because we've got another snag to the left, but not as savage. playing fish that you've hooked from snags is a very different matter to playing them in open water. Close in, like when you're fishing close, as we are today, it's as soon as you've hooked your fish, it's a really good idea to get that rod tip right under the water and start drawing the fish away from the snag. The reason I want my rod tip down is to make sure that the line has got the minimum chance of coming into contact with any overhanging branches that are dipping into the water. If you've hooked fish from a snag that's a little bit further away, I would always advocate, rather than playing them as you normally would, like pumping them in, I would advocate hooking your fish and immediately start walking backwards. You get much smoother retrieve, and you keep that constant pressure on, which can keep them moving back towards you, and enable you to draw the fish away from the snag before slackening off and resuming the fight as normal once it's a little bit closer to you. Well, he might not be a weigher, but he's living proof that you can get carp out of snags, you can get bites in them if you fish them properly, and you can get them out as long as you do it safely and go about it in the right way. Now, earlier on you've seen me place my rig with the aid of a baiting pole, but 9 times out of 10 that's not what I'll be doing. Most of the time I'm likely to be casting the rig towards a snag. Now, in order to make sure that I don't cast into the snag, it's a good idea for me to take my rig off completely, so I've just got a bare lead on the end of the line, and then creep up to the snag. I cast in short, clipping up, letting a little bit of line off, casting a little bit longer, clipping up and a little bit longer, and just creeping up gently until the lead's landing exactly where I want it. Then I can put my rig on and then make the one final cast and leave the rig in place. Now, whilst it's nice to look out over a very aesthetic setup with all your rods the same height and all looking nice and pretty, snag fishing is not the time for that sort of arrangement. It's all about having the rods in the right position to fish as effectively as possible and to give yourself the maximum chance of getting the fish out of the snag. I try and make sure that the rod's pointing not at 90 degrees from the snag, but not directly at it otherwise. That way, when I get a bite, the line's not direct onto the reel, so there is a little bit of cushioning from the rod tip, but not so much that the tip can't go right the way around, giving the fish too much line to enable it to get into the snag. Now, as much as I like to use slack lines, I can't really do that snag fishing because it would just give the fish too much play, enable them to get into the snag. So it's tight lines, and the other important thing is tight clutches. I don't want the fish to be able to take any line off that clutch at all. Because of the tight line, the bobbin's going to be high up, so I would always put the line through a line clip just to make sure you get a few bleeps of indication to let you know you've got a bite. Because I'm fishing a tight line, it means that I would like to have my rod tip as low as I can get it, but I can't go too low, so I have to make sure that the line comes off the tip and does point slightly down, as otherwise, when I get the bite, the tight clutch prevents any line from leaving the reel, meaning that the rod can lift up and off your bite alarm, and so you won't get any indication at all. Because I'm using a locked up tight clutch, there's a distinct possibility that the rod could be pulled into the water with a fast take. To prevent this happening, there are various things I can do. I've got a snag back on my alarms. You can also buy what are called snag ears. Now, they fit on the thread of your alarm and stick up either side like that, just to prevent the rod from being pulled in. Or you can just simply put a bank stick in adjacent to the rod that just stops it going anywhere. To stop the rod getting pulled forwards and into the lake, I must make sure that all my bank sticks are in well and securely. I can use butt rests that grip the rod and stop it being pulled in. You can put a bivvy peg in front of your reel handle. I can't hear because it's concrete, but 9 times out of 10 you can put a bivvy peg in front of your reel handle. Or my favourite preventative measure is to always fish with my butt rest behind the alarm. Snag fishing is all about hit and hold, so I've got to make sure that my end tackle's up to the job. Now, that means that my hook has got to resist opening out, and so for that reason I like to use a hook that's got an extra thick gauge. Now, they might be called Continental or X or whatever, but basically it's an extra strong hook. Hook link wise, I would always go for a braided hook link over a mono hook link. Once a mono hook link gets a little nick in it, it's very much weakened, whereas a braided hook link will stand up to rubbing against underwater obstructions of branches and the like much better. Now, although I'll do everything I possibly can to make sure that the fish can't get underneath the snags at all, there's always the chance that one could just make it slightly under there. So it's really important that I have some form of rubbing leader above the lead, just to guard against any abrasion that might be caused by underwater branches and obstructions and what have you. So for that, I'd normally use like a 3 foot length of either a fused leader, like a fused fluorocarbon leader, which are very thick. My favourite would be lead core or lead-free material. Both lead core and lead-free require splicing. However, if you're not happy splicing them, you can just buy them off the shelf, ready done, just ready to go. Now, I would always go for the thickest one I can get, 65 £, but the breaking strain's not really what's important. It's the diameter that's important, because that's what's going to give you your abrasion resistance and your protection against any damage. And my choice of main line is also very important when snag fishing. This is no place for thin casting lines. I want a line that's tough, absolutely abrasion resistant and bulletproof. I want it as thick as possible, really, just because the thicker your line is, the more abrasion resistant it's going to be. So I would opt for line in a 0.40 diameter, and my choices would be either Hydrotough or my favourite 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏+. I'm happy to use any type of lead arrangement system, provided one thing is in place, and that is that it's got the ability to drop the lead. Now, the easiest way to go about that is to use a lead clip system. They're very reliable, drop the lead ever so easily every single time. Another system that does the same job and works very well is an inline drop-off system. Traditionally, your leader would run through the insert on an inline lead, but with a drop-off system, it runs through your tail rubber and then outside the lead. Now, these leads that I've got a little channel which accepts the leader. Your tail rubber just pops onto the insert as normal, and then at the other end, we've got a special swivel. Now, this swivel's got 2 rings. One of the rings attaches to your leader and the other ring to your hook link, leaving the actual swivel part to pop into the insert, the lead insert, without anything attached to it. When you get your bite, that pops out like that, leaving the lead held on just by the tail rubber. And should that lead get caught, it drops the lead, leaving just the line. Now, the other system that I like to use, and it's probably my favourite lead system of all, is a helicopter system. Traditionally, they don't offer the facility to drop a lead, relying on the hook link discharging. However, with the addition of a drop-out child safety clip, which sits inside a buffer bead, they can be set to drop the lead. For my actual hook bait presentation, by their very nature, snags are generally fairly small, so I'm not fishing over a wide spread of bait. My baited area is likely to be reasonably dense, so I don't want a big high pop-up sitting over the top. Fish won't be writing themselves in between mouthfuls. They'll be just lips down, hovering across the bottom. So I want something very low. High pop-up could get missed, but it'll also look a little bit out of place. So I don't want something too blatant. So ideally, bottom bait or waft type presentation is perfect. However, in some situations, particularly if you've got what I'd call a live snag, some snags are trees that have died, or dead branches that are in the water. I don't have any leaves or anything on them. They're more likely to be clean underneath. However, if you've got what I'd call a live snag, so that's a living branch, usually a willow that's got leaves and twigs falling off it, you're going to get some detritus on the lake bed. And in that situation, I'd be happier with some form of a pop-up that would just keep the hook off the bottom. Now, I use a hinge rig for mine, which I can fish very, very low. That's probably I don't know, ½ an inch, 3/4 of an inch off the bottom, but a Ronnie rig will achieve a very similar presentation and should prevent it from catching in any twigs or anything that might mask the hook point. So there we go, that's the end of our day snag fishing. Fortunately, we managed to catch another one, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to take something from this that will maybe make you a little bit more confident when targeting snags. And if there's one thing you do take away from this, it's that fish safety is paramount. Next time out, we'll be back at the same place, trying to catch a carp using a completely different method.